Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Judy and I love history, travel, and finding out how people live and how and why the places where they live change over time. Perceptions of what a city looked like in the past can and do alter, sometimes quite radically, over time, and this is the case in Narbonne. We have nearly 2 millennia in which people had time to forget. The memory of what the city had actually looked like has faded as the economics of the place changed, and much of the first infrastructure, all of it apparently built by the hardy Roman Imperial Army, either fell apart or more likely was repurposed or disassembled for building materials. That's what happened here. My expectations for this visit a decade ago were actually quite low. I was about 4 weeks into a 2-month journey and planned this as a rest-up spot. I had a prearranged appointment 3 days in the future in Toulon. I knew what I wanted, a couple of fairly quiet days, an up-to-date apartment hotel where I could unwind and do some laundry, and an easy launch point for a couple of simple day trips. I hadn't planned on doing much sightseeing here because I didn't think there was much to see. I figured this for a pleasant market town, one with a cathedral, and it was. I knew from history that once upon a time it had been a major Roman imperial provincial capital, but that there was hardly anything left to see. I didn't have big plans. I thought I'd ride around on a little tourist train, the corny, fun kind with a jeep or something dressed up to look like a locomotive engine. The train will trolley you through the local sites, most of the time with an audio that's too garbled to understand in any language. Train gave me a clue that there was a lot here. It's taken me, as well as local authorities, a decade and more to really start digging deeper. You can read about the more recently unearthed, or at least rediscovered, Roman infrastructure in my WordPress blog. The link is in the description box below. For now, even without knowing about it, if you keep your eyes open, you get a lot of surprises, and all the surprises here were actually quite pleasant. So join me, the armchair traveler, on a city discovery tour. But first, please remember to like and subscribe. That little click will help my channel grow. Be sure to check the description box for more information and links to other resources. To understand Narbonne, you need to know a bit about both its geography and a bit of archaeology. Roman conquerors wanted to extend and defend the borders of the empire and to profit by exploiting those areas with trade. Narbonne's geography explains a great deal here. The city today is located about 10 miles from its Roman imperial era Mediterranean port, although in the Roman era it was much closer and was accessible in those days by using the river Aude. Roman engineers set up what would become the city inland from the Mediterranean. Roman legionaries didn't build roads here just because there was a settlement. The settlements were established because there was a road. The two went together as a kind of planned development scheme. They built the roads to move men and goods around and through the area. They built the settlements along the road to provide a place to stop and rest, perhaps to change draft animals, and to provide secure storage for goods being moved about the empire. You might think of these spots, each of the dots on the map above is one of them, as the Roman imperial equivalent of truck plazas. A Roman legionary typically traveled 20 to 25 miles a day on well-maintained roads. Of course, the actual distance could vary depending on the weather, the terrain, and how important the march was. Civilian travelers, businessmen at first, would travel more slowly. A little surprisingly to me, freight transported in carts might go as much as 40 to 50 miles a day. To move at that speed, they needed way stations, which the French to this day refer to as relais d'étape when writing about the Tour de France, a place where travelers could stop, rest, get food, water, and most importantly, change draft animals. These were the superhighways of the day. Soldiers, business people, later on pilgrims, and freight moved over these transportation systems. These roads were key not just to travel, but to exploiting whatever the area had to give. The next step was moving those goods from where they were produced out to the greater empire. That's where our road system expands into a multimodal freight transportation system. Those Roman roads we just visited really were the superhighways of their age. They were well sighted, marked, guarded, and even had way stations along the way. They were easy to follow and relatively safe. They did a great job of moving goods on land. However, building them was expensive and time-consuming. neither of which Imperial Rome was in the habit of wasting. The easier and cheaper alternative was to move goods on water. Sometimes little was required to make this work, perhaps shoring up the embankments and dredging out some shallow spots. Other times the river didn't run where it was needed, or turned the wrong way, or wasn't navigable because it was too shallow. When that happened, it was often most cost efficient to improve the river by building canals. A canal is a man-made waterway. Today, the Canal de la Robine that you see here is one of the focal points of downtown modern Narbonne. It wasn't an original idea. Recent research has shown that this was originally a Roman canal that was already dug at the foundation of the city in the 1st century BCE. The channel led to a lake. The lake was largely navigable and was the outer part of the Roman city. Here, goods could be transferred to riverboats and transported to the city or shipped to other parts of the empire. Because the area around Narbonne was rich in minerals, gold, silver, copper, and tin were already being extracted and processed since the 1st century BCE, and agricultural production was also a prize to be traded, merchants needed a reliable way to get their products between the interior and Narbonne and the port. Roman builders dug out a canal right here in Narbonne, at least partially following the line of the river Aude, which was called the Atax in antiquity. The canal bore the same name and followed the general course of the river. However, in 1316, a disastrous flood changed the course of the river, making it useless for transportation to the port. The response was a new canal, which they called Canal de la Robine. It must have been expensive to build and maintain. Later on, it was also extended northward to join the Canal du Midi. Unfortunately for the operators, later on, especially since World War I with its emphasis on rail transportation, freight traffic declined. Sometimes a canal company would buy and operate a freight line, but mostly they saw no purpose in maintaining what to them was an expensive white elephant and something of an eyesore. The canals degraded over time. Never underestimate the ability of humans to allow infrastructure to slip to the point of uselessness and then think about removing it, only for some enterprising souls to repurpose it for modern use. Recently, the canal has seen increased usage, this time by pleasure boaters, and in late 2023 and early 2024, it was actually closed, repaired, dredged, and generally fixed up. It gets a lot more traffic now than it did before. Roman legionaries on expedition didn't just sleep in the woods if they didn't have to. They might march for around 6 hours each day and then needed to find and build a relatively safe place to spend the night. From time to time, these camps expanded and lasted a lot more than just one night, and many of them have become cities that we know today. The most important feature of these camps then was location. Typically, legionaries would pitch camp on a rise, if not a hill, and close source of drinking water. The camp would be surrounded by a ditch or a moat, tall walls, and had an entirely predictable layout, something that the soldiers could dig and build themselves relatively quickly. They followed an approved layout and pattern for placing interior roads, buildings, road supply, sanitation, even temples in the bigger sites. Over time, some of the camps grew. A successful Roman encampment would draw local traders who pitched up tiny hamlets outside the walls to be closer to their potential business partners. As business improved and the area became settled and accepting of Roman ideas, those hamlets could be incorporated into what could become, in time, very large cities. We don't have a photograph or a painting showing us what Roman Narbonne looked like, and much of the infrastructure has disappeared. But based on what we know on camp and city design in general, we can make a pretty good guess of the layout. What you see here is a hypothetical map of Narbonne based on those fundamentals, but prepared in 1986. It's pretty weak on the details. There's a lot more to find, but finding things requires will, a reason, money, and expertise. In recent years, elements of a French national group called INRAP, the French National Institute for Preventive Archaeological Research, has been looking as part of its mission to detect and scientifically study archaeological remains that might otherwise be destroyed by land development projects, such as construction of roads or buildings and other infrastructure. They have already uncovered remains of part of a Roman-era city wall, a local Roman cemetery, and are pretty sure they know where the Colosseum must have been. You can learn more about INRAP and its discoveries online. Check out the information box below for some links. Our walk today will begin in the north of what was the area around the Roman Forum, at an oddly shaped park. From there we'll move south to the Forum, check out the granary, the cathedral, and the Archbishop's Palace, where we'll examine a chunk of the ancient Roman road, the Via Domitia, still to be seen. After that we'll stroll along the canal and finish up at a far more modern central market. Starting at the very north of my map is today's square of Thérèse and Léon Blum, named after the couple to honor their contributions and legacy to French society and politics. Léon Blum was a prominent French politician, and not just the first socialist, but the first Jew to ever become Prime Minister of France. Thérèse was his second wife, and apparently she was also actively involved in social and political activities. Neither one of these two had a family connection in the area, but Léon had served as the representative for Narbonne to the Chamber of Deputies, that's the national government, for the area before World War II. It's a beautiful park here in the center of Narbonne, providing a space for the community to enjoy, but it was also something of a puzzlement, at least to me. As you can see from this Google Earth photo, it's round. That's not unusual, except no other parks or squares I could identify in the city were round. In antiquity, this was part of the general area of the Forum. Modern archaeologists think there might have been public baths here, but the shape argues for something bigger, perhaps even a theater. Clearly, more digging, when it becomes affordable, is indicated. As it was 2,000 years ago, so it remains today. The Place du Forum is a meetup space complete with people buying and selling stuff. This photo shows you a heavily treed and quite pleasant park. To the sides are buyers, sellers, and shaded benches for the merely curious like me. And except for my clothes, probably no different from those who frequented the place 2,000 years ago. My photo shows the remains of what must have been a column or perhaps a part of a wall or the portico. The Forum in ancient Narbonne was quite large. It was approximately 85 meters wide and 60 meters deep, or around the size of a modern American football field. This large area was surrounded by a portico and served as the main public square for the city, hosting various important buildings and activities, including a basilica, and most likely at least one or more temples. The exact location of the basilica, like so much else, isn't precisely documented, but it would have been an important feature near other civic buildings. Roman water distribution was generally through fountains located throughout the city or town, and there certainly would have been at least one here in the Forum. What you see here is a replica of a 17th century fountain called the Fontaine Bistan. This replica was actually installed in 2001. I initially saw this as an eyesore, and depending on your taste, you may think so too. But the gaudiness is perfectly in line with Roman sensibilities from 2 millennia ago. This is the Horeum. The word means granary or storehouse. In this case, it was probably both. Roman Provence was more than a valuable military acquisition. It was an area to be exploited for agricultural and mineral trade. Whether exporting to the greater empire or importing goods, shippers needed a safe and secure place to store their goods. A secure granary or storehouse was the answer. Unlike so much else in Roman Narbonne, we have more than just a guess about what this looked like. This was a large building, probably built in sections since we know about 2 wings today. The structure had several galleries and cellars, complete with stairwells leading down from ground level and most likely secured with gates. The best guess is they decided deliberately to build it underground for stable temperatures, a 2,000-year-old form of climate control. Narbonne Cathedral, technically the Cathedral of Saint-Just and Saint-Pasteur, gives us a clue. The local people knew how to adapt with the times. When Christianity became legal in the empire, the city Christianized. As Roman imperial cities Christianized, older Roman temples, sometimes even Roman basilicas, which were law courts, were often converted into Christian churches. Around 313 in the Christian era, a church was built here on top of what was originally the site dedicated to Mercury, which itself dated back to the 1st century. Narbonne was established as an episcopal seat, meaning it was the seat of a bishop, and bishops rated cathedrals. The city's status as a cathedral city was solidified with the construction of this cathedral, which began in the 12th century and was consecrated in 1330. The cathedral does have remnants of the earlier Roman imperial era temple of Mercury, but has never been completed. Several things contributed to this, including financial constraints, changing economic conditions, and the unusual size and location of the cathedral, which would have required demolishing part of a city wall to finish it. If that wall survived, I couldn't find a trace of it, although other parts of it have been excavated elsewhere in the city. The cathedral showcases a beautiful blend of Romanesque and Gothic styles, characterized by soaring ceilings, intricate stone carvings, stained glass, and gorgeous altars. All of it is supported by the buttresses so characteristic of the period. Although never finished, the cathedral has the tallest Gothic choir in France, reaching over 130 feet high. The overall beauty of the structure is a testament to the architectural advancements of the period. The cathedral is very well known for its impressive stained glass windows, which date back to its building in the 13th and 14th century. The windows show various biblical scenes and saints and fill the interior with vibrant color and light. The high altar, located in the chancel, is an important focal point within the cathedral. It shows sculptures of the patron saints of the cathedral, Saint Justus and Saint Pasteur. You might imagine that Justus and Pasteur were local boys, but they were not. Outside the cathedral is a cloister and a garden, which connects the cathedral to the Archbishop's Palace, our next stop. This area was the site of the original Carolingian church and provided a very pleasant and shady spot to rest. The cathedral is dedicated to the memory of two men named Saint Just and Saint Pasteur, sometimes anglicized to Justus and Pasteur. According to the handout I picked up at the cathedral, they were two Spanish brothers and martyrs who died in 304 in the Christian era. The church didn't share anything else about the pair, but I found out more from Wikipedia. Apparently, Justus and Pasteur were very young, 13 and 9 years old respectively, and were killed for their faith, as were so many others, during the Diocletian persecutions of Christians. As was so often the case, they most likely were martyred by the Romans in the days when the empire believed that its own pantheon of gods were key to its survival, and everything else, including Christianity, was a threat. The building that dominates is square, starting in medieval times, that rooted in some Imperial Roman foundations is today the palace of the archbishops of the city. The palace is an example of what's called neoclassical architecture. Parts of it, like this enormous tower, look like a fortress because that is what it was originally designed to be. The tower you see here is called the Donjon Guy à Céline. It was commissioned in 1308. Frontage includes a section of 5 tall arches and 2 more towers dating from the 14th century. The palace underwent significant renovation and restructuring in the 19th century, led by the famous French architect Viollet-le-Duc. In many cases, Eugène went far beyond just preserving and conserving existing buildings, although that happened as well. The palace sits adjacent to this large square. From the palace, you can see a short section of the recently unearthed Via Roman Domitia. Our walk today through the city has partially followed the route of the Roman Via Domitia. The Via Domitia was the first Roman road built in Gaul, designed to link Italy and Spain through Gaul. It cut through what is now Narbonne, although it's probably more accurate to say that Narbonne was built near to it to provide services to the military and civilian travelers. The Romans, who really loved mythology, said that at least part of the road followed the route traveled by Hercules. At Narbonne, it met up with the Via Aquitania, which led toward the Atlantic Ocean through Toulouse and Bordeaux. Narbonne was a crucial strategic crossroads for the Via Domitia, and it was an accessible but well-defendable port in those days. Entering the city from the south allows visitors to follow the same route that the Romans might have followed. The road today is called the Rue du Pont Marchand. It means Merchant Street Bridge, and it follows the route of the original Cardo Maximus of the Roman city, which was actually outlined by the Via Domitia. The road includes remains of a bridge that was part of the historic route. The bridge, originally called the Pons Vitus, or Old Bridge, allowed travelers to cross the Aude River from the south. The Pons Vitus in Narbonne was built by the Roman Empire around the 1st century BCE as part of that extensive road network. The bridge originally had 7 arches, although only one is in use today. The other 6 arches disappeared when the Aude changed its course after an enormous flood in 1316. This street opens up into the Place de Hotel de Ville. Aside from the Archbishop's Palace, which we already visited, the main camera fodder here is actually a hole in the ground. Under the square, there's a tiny fragment of the once dominating Roman road, now several feet below modern ground level. As you can see, it's possible to climb down and walk along the original Roman superhighway, at least for a few dozen feet. At the far northeast of the square, the road continues in what today is called the Rue Droite. The name translates to straight street in English and comes from the distinctive straight alignment, so very different from everything you see in medieval cities and clearly owing to the original Roman urban planning, aimed at creating an efficient direct route through the city. Today, it's known for its pretty setting and is lined with shops and cafes, bars, and restaurants. The Rue Droite leads us back to the Place du Forum. I love and I collect old-fashioned central markets. Like the pleasure boaters who work their way up and down the canal, walking tourists like us, and local residents all need places to buy food. There's always the option of the 21st century supermarket, but central markets like this one are a lot more fun. This is Les Halles de Narbonne, the city's central market, located a few steps up and inland from the bank of the canal. The first thing that struck me about the market was the vast expanse of glass and the fact that it actually looked pretty. I don't think anyone would accuse our local Safeway of looking pretty. The market is housed in a stunning Belle Epoque building that dates back to 1901. That style had an emphasis on optimism of the period. Unfortunately, that optimism had a short run and ended with the outbreak of World War I in 1914. The Belle Epoque style featured plenty of modern materials, including extensive use of plate, glass, and iron, and a lot of decorative details. You can see that style in grand halls, covered markets, train stations, and even theaters of the period. All these buildings were designed to reflect civic pride and technological progress. The best part about the markets is that they feature local produce and specialties, especially wines. If you get lucky, a little cafe might have wine by the glass so you can try out the local stuff at minimum cost. Here's a hint though, be sure to write down the name. You might just as well take a picture of the bottle with your cell phone if it only appears on a chalkboard, so you can pick up a bottle later if you want. I've been looking for this particular bottle of wine for the last 10 years based on this photograph and haven't yet found it in the United States. Modern facilities are designed to discourage lingering and loitering, but these were set up to encourage wandering about and gave permission for chit-chat in a way that the modern supermarket actively disdains. The market is easily found if you're on foot or coming in from the canal boat because it sits right above the canal itself. But there are other ways to find it if you're on foot. The easiest way, in my personal experience, is to look for your fellow shoppers. Opening times and days vary widely, but when one is open, there will be shoppers, invariably female in my experience, heading out either singly or in groups. You can ID them by their shopping carts. I found this pair and just followed them. It was more discreet and, to be honest, a lot more fun than peering at Google Maps. Whether you decide to linger in a local cafe and try out your French on a fellow shopper or take your haul back, you have a chance to experience local products and a very nice local experience. You may decide to supplement the fresh foods and wines with prepared goodies from the local supermarket, but the central market is a lot more fun. Thank you for joining me to visit this unappreciated beauty of a town in the south of France. Come back next time for another adventure with me, the Armchair Traveler, as your guide.